The night I walked into that mansion in Buckhead, Atlanta, I wasn't the scared 16-year-old girl who'd slept in the basement for 2 years. I was Colonel Vanessa Hart, United States Army. And the woman who had stolen everything from me was about to learn that the military doesn't just teach you how to fight. It teaches you how to win. The front door swung open, and there she stood. My Aunt Patricia. She was wearing a silk robe that cost more than my first year's salary. Her face was pulled tight from surgeries I'd unknowingly paid for. She looked at me like I was still that orphan she'd taken in out of charity. She said, "Vanessa? What are you doing here? And why are you wearing that uniform?" I stepped inside. I didn't ask permission. I didn't need to. Behind me, 2 Criminal Investigation Division agents followed in silence. The marble floor echoed with their footsteps. I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "Aunt Patricia, I came to settle an old debt." My father was Colonel James Hart. He served 28 years in the Army. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a hero. He'd served in Desert Storm, in Bosnia, and in Afghanistan. He had more medals than I could count, but he never bragged about them. He taught me that integrity wasn't about what you wore on your chest. It was about what you carried in your heart. When I was 14 years old, my mother passed away from a sudden illness. It was just me and my father after that. We were a team. We'd sit on the porch of our modest house in Fayetteville, North Carolina, near Fort Bragg, and he'd tell me stories about his service. He'd say, "Vanessa, one day you're going to do great things. You're going to be stronger than you ever imagined. But remember, strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up." I believed him. I held onto those words like a lifeline. Then, 3 years later, my father died. Heart attack. Sudden. Devastating. I was 17 years old, and I was completely alone. Or so I thought. My Aunt Patricia, my father's younger sister, swooped in like a savior. She lived in a massive estate in Buckhead, the wealthy part of Atlanta. She wore designer clothes, drove a luxury car, and spoke like she was doing the world a favor by existing. She had never visited us in Fayetteville. Not once. But the moment my father passed, she was there, with a lawyer in tow, talking about taking care of me. I was young. I was grieving. I didn't know any better. Patricia told me my father had left a small inheritance that was tied up in legal red tape. She said it would take years to access. In the meantime, she'd graciously allow me to live with her in Atlanta. I was grateful. I was relieved. I had no idea I was walking into a trap. The first night at her house, she took me to the basement. It wasn't a finished basement. It was cold, damp, and smelled like mildew. She said, "This is where you'll sleep. I need the upstairs rooms for guests." I didn't complain. I was just grateful to have a roof over my head. The next day, she told me I'd be working at her boutique, a small shop in the upscale Buckhead village. She said it was for room and board. I worked 40 hours a week. I folded clothes, rang up sales, and cleaned the store. I never saw a single paycheck. Patricia said it was going toward my upkeep. I believed her. For 2 years, I believed her. She'd make snide comments. "You're lucky I took you in. Nobody else wanted you." She'd tell her friends I was a charity case. She'd buy herself designer handbags and book exotic vacations while I ate peanut butter sandwiches in the basement. I never complained. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. But something always nagged at me. My father was a colonel. He was a careful man. He had a government pension, life insurance, and savings. There was no way he'd left me with nothing. But every time I asked Patricia about the inheritance, she'd wave her hand dismissively and say, "It's tied up in probate. These things take years. Don't worry your pretty little head about it." I didn't know it then, but she was already spending my money. Caribbean cruises. A full facelift. A new Mercedes. New breasts. And underneath it all, a house of lies. On my 18th birthday, I made a decision. I was going to join the army. Just like my father. I didn't tell Patricia. I didn't ask for permission. I walked to the recruiting station in downtown Atlanta and signed up. I shipped out to basic training at Fort Jackson in South Carolina 2 weeks later. Patricia was furious. She said I was abandoning her. She said I was ungrateful. She said I'd never make it through basic training. She didn't come to see me off. She didn't write me a single letter. But I didn't need her. I had my father's voice in my head. Get back up. Basic training was brutal. The heat, the exhaustion, the constant pressure. But I thrived. I discovered a strength I never knew I had. I wasn't just surviving, I was excelling. I was promoted to squad leader. I graduated with honors. And I never looked back. Over the next 8 years, I climbed through the ranks. I served overseas. I earned my commission as an officer. I was stationed at Fort Benning, Georgia, Fort Hood, Texas, and finally, the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. I earned my degree in forensic accounting through online courses, something I'd started because a part of me never stopped wondering about my father's money. One night, during a deployment in Germany, I couldn't sleep. I started digging through old records. I had access to legal databases through the military. I requested my father's complete financial records from the state of Georgia. It took months, but I got them. What I found made my blood run cold. There was no legal red tape. There was no probate delay. My father's will was straightforward. Everything, the house, the savings, the life insurance, the pension, was left to me. Vanessa Hart. Sole beneficiary. The estate was worth over $300,000. But someone had changed the will's executor. The original executor was a family lawyer named Mr. Thompson, a man my father had known for 20 years. The new executor was my Aunt Patricia. And the signature on the change of executor document wasn't my father's. It was a forgery. A sloppy one at that. Patricia had forged my father's signature. She'd submitted the document to the court. She'd seized control of the estate and drained it dry. Every cent. Every dollar. I stared at the screen in my barracks in Germany. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I couldn't breathe. The woman who'd treated me like a servant, who'd made me sleep in a basement, who'd mocked my grief, she'd stolen everything. My education. My security. My future. All of it. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I did something far more dangerous. I started planning. I requested leave and flew back to the United States. I went to Atlanta, but I didn't go to Patricia's house. I went to the courthouse. I requested the probate records. I hired a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes. I tracked down the original executor, Mr. Thompson, who'd been mysteriously retired and living in Florida. He gave me a sworn statement confirming he'd never signed the change of executor document. I had my evidence. Bank statements. Forged signatures. Witness statements. A full accounting of every dime Patricia had stolen. But I didn't stop there. I kept digging. And I found something even more damning. Patricia's boutique wasn't just a small shop. It was a money laundering front. She'd been filing false tax returns, inflating expenses, and funneling cash through shell companies. The boutique was a cover for a much larger scheme. The IRS had been investigating her for years, but they'd never had enough evidence to move forward. Now, thanks to my forensic accounting training, they did. I sat in my small apartment at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, reviewing the files. I had enough evidence to put Patricia away for a long time. But I didn't want to just destroy her. I wanted her to understand what she'd done. I wanted her to feel, even for a moment, the weight of her betrayal. So I planned a dinner. I called Patricia and told her I was coming to visit. I said I'd missed her. I said I wanted to talk. She was suspicious, but she agreed. I told her I'd be wearing my dress blues. I wanted her to see how far I'd come. She agreed, probably thinking she'd be able to brag to her friends about her military niece. She had no idea what was waiting for her. I arrived at the Buckhead estate at exactly 7 p.m. The house was just as extravagant as I remembered. A fountain in the driveway. A crystal chandelier visible through the window. Everything Patricia had bought with my inheritance. She opened the door wearing a silk gown. Her face was pulled tight from the facelift I'd paid for. She smiled warmly, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. She was trying to figure out why I was really there. She said, "Vanessa, darling. You look so military." I stepped inside. "Thank you, Aunt Patricia. I wanted to see you." She led me to the dining room. The table was set with fine china, crystal glasses, candles. It looked like a magazine spread. But I wasn't there for dinner. We sat down. She poured me a glass of sweet tea, Georgian tradition. She made small talk. How was the military? Was I seeing anyone? Was I finally ready to settle down? I let her ramble. I wanted her to feel comfortable. I wanted her to let her guard down. Then, I reached into my briefcase. I placed a thick folder on the table. Her eyes widened. I said, "Aunt Patricia, I've been doing some research." She laughed nervously. "Research? What kind of research?" I opened the folder. I pulled out the first page, a bank statement showing a withdrawal of $50,000 for home renovations. Except I knew those renovations were actually a cruise to the Mediterranean. I said, "Do you remember this one?" Her face went pale. "Vanessa, what is this?" I slid the next page across the table. A forged signature. My father's name. I knew it was fake because my father always crossed his J with a distinctive flourish. The forgery didn't have it. I said, "This is your signature, isn't it? You forged my father's name." She started shaking. "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out the next page. A tax return showing false expenses for the boutique. I'd already flagged it for the IRS. I said, "This is a federal crime, Aunt Patricia. You're looking at fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and tax evasion. You're looking at 15 to 20 years. She stood up. "You're bluffing." I looked at her calmly. "I don't bluff." And then, I clapped my hands twice. The dining room doors swung open. 2 CID agents stepped in, both in full dress uniforms. Behind him stood a woman from the IRS. Patricia stared at them like she'd seen a ghost. I said, "Aunt Patricia, I'd like you to meet Special Agent Cooper from the Criminal Investigation Division. He's been very interested in your boutique's financial records. And this is Agent Miller from the IRS. She's been looking for you for 3 years." Patricia's face crumpled. She started to speak, to make excuses, to lie, but no words came. She just stood there, clutching the back of her chair, her silk robe now soaked with sweat. I stood up. I walked over to her. I looked her directly in the eyes. I said, "You took everything from me. My inheritance. My education. My trust. You made me sleep in a basement and work like a servant. You told me I was a burden. You stole my father's legacy and spent it on surgeries and vacations. But I'm here to tell you something. You didn't just steal from me. You stole from the United States of America. And the United States never, ever forgets." The agents stepped forward. One of them said, "Patricia Whitmore, you're under arrest." She didn't resist. She couldn't. She just stared at me like she'd never really seen me before. Like I was a stranger wearing her niece's face. As they handcuffed her, I walked toward the door. I paused at the threshold. I turned back and said, "My father taught me that integrity isn't about what you take. It's about what you leave behind. You left behind a legacy of theft. I'd rather leave behind a legacy of service. You'll have time to think about that in prison." Then I walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Patricia's trial was brief. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements, forged documents, witness testimony, tax records, and the audio recording of our dinner, which I'd made, because I'd learned to always cover my bases. She pleaded guilty to all charges. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in federal prison. She was forced to sell the house, the boutique, and everything she owned to repay the stolen funds. The IRS seized the rest. I didn't keep a single penny of what was recovered. I couldn't. That money was tainted. It had paid for a facelift while I slept in a basement. It had bought a Mercedes while I worked unpaid. I wanted nothing to do with it. Instead, I donated the full amount, plus interest, to a foundation that provides scholarships for military children who've lost parents in service. Children just like me. Children who'd been left behind and forgotten. I stood at the ceremony when the first scholarship was awarded. It was given to a young girl whose father had died in Afghanistan. She was exactly the same age I was when I lost my father. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "Thank you, ma'am. I want to be a soldier one day. Just like you." I had to hold back my own tears. I knelt down and said, "You're going to be so much more than a soldier. You're going to be a leader. And when you get there, remember to always open the door for the next person." That moment meant more to me than any inheritance ever could. A lot of people think revenge means hurting someone back. I used to believe that. When I first discovered the truth, I was consumed with anger. I wanted to destroy Patricia. I wanted her to feel every ounce of pain she caused me. But standing there in that courtroom, watching her being led away in handcuffs, I felt something unexpected. I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad, not sad for her. Sad for what could have been. She could have been a mentor. She could have been a mother figure. She could have helped me build a future. Instead, she chose greed. And in doing so, she destroyed herself. I realized that the revenge I'd wanted wasn't about seeing her suffer. It was about seeing her understand. And when I looked into her eyes in that courtroom, I think she finally did. She wrote me a letter from prison, years later. She apologized. She didn't ask for forgiveness, she said she didn't deserve it. She just wanted me to know that she was sorry. I never wrote back. I didn't need to. Because the real revenge wasn't the prison sentence. It wasn't losing the house or the money. The real revenge was something far greater. I had become everything she said I couldn't be. I'd become an officer. A leader. A person of integrity. I'd built a life she couldn't touch, a life built on service, honor, and sacrifice. And that was the sweetest victory of all. The deepest wounds heal with time. But the deepest victories aren't about tearing someone down. They're about lifting yourself up so high that the people who tried to break you can never reach you again. My father used to say, "Vanessa, the world will try to steal your light. But nobody can dim a light that comes from within." I used to think he was just being sentimental. Now I know the truth. The light he was talking about isn't something you're born with. It's something you build. One choice at a time. One sacrifice at a time. One act of integrity at a time. Patricia tried to steal my light. But she couldn't. Because it wasn't something she could touch. It wasn't in a bank account. It wasn't in a house. It was in my heart. And that was something no one could ever take. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that the truth always finds the light, or if it encouraged you to keep going even when people try to tear you down, please share it. Share it with someone who might need that reminder today. And if you'd like to hear more stories about resilience, justice, and hope, consider subscribing. There's so much more to come. Thank you for spending this time with me. And remember, integrity isn't about what you take. It's about what you leave behind.